Hello, everybody.
Good evening.
Alan, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I got an email from somebody. I don't know whether it was officially from the Sustainability Committee or not, but she wanted to know about the planning for a dark skies initiative at the new elementary school, and I didn't know who to send her to. Are you the person, or?
It'd be Adam probably be the one to answer those questions for the most part. But I would hope that they're doing things like some downcast lighting and things like that for the night lighting,
Yeah,
probably on timers and so on.
I would assume so. So I kind of said that, but I did want to send her to somebody who was knowledgeable about the details of the facility. I wasn't sure whether you were the person or not.
Nope, but I can ask too, though. When I'm in the meetings on Thursday, I can ask and see what they have to say. So,
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I would like a moment to address the town manager at the start of the meeting, if that'd be okay.
It's not on the agenda. What is it that you want to talk about?
I would like to talk about the timing of crucial materials that we need in order to deliberate and vote on this issue tonight.
It has been in your box. It was on the agenda. The agenda and packet were on the agenda sender for several days, and there was a revision that was presented tonight, or yet today sometime.
That's not timely, Madam Mayor. I'm talking about the revisions.
All right. You know, one of the issues here is that our staff have lives at home too, and it's sometimes difficult to ask people to work 60 hours a week instead of 40. So we need stuff that's in time for us to consider it, but sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. So
Well, in order for me to deliberate and vote on issues, I need to do due diligence. And I
So
can't.
my understanding for this evening's sort of program, as it were, obviously the council will make its own decisions on what it wants to do. There's discussion tonight, and each of these items will be gone through individually. I don't know that there's any votes that will be taken tonight, at least not on some of the things that are newer than what was presented back in January.
I understand that, but we have to have discussion and deliberation on it. In order for me to have an educated discussion and deliberations, I need to do due diligence. And 5 hours before the meeting to receive your revisions doesn't give me ample opportunity to do due diligence. I requested the water test, and yes, I wanted an answer so I could have some information for tonight's meeting. And you wrote me back and discussed staff efficiency. I'd like to discuss my efficiency as a counselor here. In order for me to be efficient, I have to have the information in a timely manner so I can do my due diligence in order to represent the citizens here in the town of Mansfield in an intelligent way.
I just did something weird.
What was that, Madam Mayor?
Some reason you have all disappeared. Oh, there we go. Okay. I It's after 7, so I'm going to have to call the meeting to order. So,
Recording in progress.
I don't expect us to take any votes tonight. This is all information only. Okay, it is 7:02 on February 15th, 2022. This is a special meeting of the Mansfield Town Council for the purpose of being presented with the town manager's proposals for spending our ARPA money. There's a very lengthy presentation and lots of parts to it. I know that last night I asked if we could be brief and conclude the meeting relatively early. That didn't work, but I'm going to ask it again. And so in order to keep this meeting moving, I'm going to ask that we let Mr. Aylesworth make his full presentation and keep track of your questions. And if you need to go get pencil and paper, I would excuse you momentarily while you go do that. But I really want to get all the way through the presentation before we start picking it apart. Because if we start taking it to pieces now, we will be here well after midnight. So that is how I'm going to conduct the meeting. Mr. Coleman?
Yes, I'm waiting for a response from the town manager. I'm asking him a question on whether or not he could provide us information ahead of the meeting, not 5 hours ahead, maybe 2-3 days ahead. Is that possible, Ryan?
Let me just point out that the majority of the material in front of us has been in our packets for quite some time, at least since last week. So, but
Not the
Mr.
revision.
Aylesworth, perhaps you'd like to answer Mr. Coleman's question.
Certainly, Madam Mayor. There are some, there's a subset of the projects that are going to be included in tonight's discussion that were not shared in January. I don't know the rough percentage of what was included in January versus what was new. I would say that the majority of what is included will be a repeat of what you have seen dating back some weeks and months now. When this meeting was scheduled, my understanding was that it was viewed as basically the start of a discussion that would be some weeks in the making. And we can talk about kind of what that timeline looks like extending into March, but I was not anticipating that the council would be voting on anything tonight. And so to the extent that there was a need for follow-up or additional information that wasn't readily available as part of tonight's presentation, there would be plenty of opportunity for myself and staff to furnish that information. So I did not view providing, much like I guess I would view it the same way as introduction of the budget. Past precedent has been it's introduced and then it's deliberated upon and discussed at some length in the weeks after. So, certainly trying to provide information to the council in a timely fashion. Was not expecting the council to take any votes tonight. So I guess that contributed to my feeling that providing this material some days in advance of the meeting wasn't necessarily necessary under the circumstances.
All right. Ms. Chang, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Osberger.
Here.
Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder.
Here.
Coleman.
Here.
Bertoni. Kotchenberger. Moran.
Here.
Shuren.
Here.
Shaken.
Here.
Mr.
Thank you.
Fertoni will be joining us as soon as he can get free from his work assignments. So what's on the agenda is Mr. Aylesworth's proposals for how to spend our ARPA money. I'm going to ask that everybody hold their questions until his report is finished because there are so many moving parts. And as we've said, this is not a meeting for making final decisions. It's a meeting for gathering information and preparing ourselves for further deliberation. So with that, unless anybody has any objections, we will ask Mr. Aylesworth to proceed.
All right. Does everybody see first slide of a presentation? Okay. I know this may seem a bit repetitive because some of this content is a repeat from previous presentations I've given, but because some viewers at home, some members of the public may not have seen earlier presentations, I wanted to rehash some of this, and it's probably good for refresher purposes anyway. So the American Rescue Plan Act, what I'll be calling ARPA tonight, was a $1.9 trillion funding package, and that included funding to directly to individuals and families, schools, businesses, municipalities, and basically any and all places suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Of that total $1.9 trillion nationally, Connecticut municipalities are slated to receive a little over $2.5 billion, of which a little over $1.5 billion will be going to municipalities, what is being referred to as general government, and a little under $1 billion to schools. The town of Mansfield will be receiving a little over $7.5 million of that $2.5 billion total. And those funds are being dispersed via two equal sized tranches. So about 3.7 or $3.8 million in each case. We received the first tranche back in the summer of 21, and we'll be receiving the second tranche 12 months after the first. So that'll be in the summer of 2022. That $7.54 million figure does not include rescue plan funds in the form of ESSER funds, elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund allocations that have been received or will be received by Mansfield Public Schools in the amount of roughly $750,000, or Region 19 in the amount of about $835,000. The eligible uses of the funds fall in one of 5 buckets. I won't read this verbatim because you've seen this before and the text is on the screen, but those eligible uses are supporting the public health response to the pandemic, addressing negative economic impacts, replacing public sector revenue loss, premium pay for essential workers, and water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So based on the feedback you all provided to the recommendations that I presented back on January 10th, I've made some changes that we'll go through tonight. But the biggest item that seemed clear to me that there was, I don't want to say lack of support from the council in terms of lack of support for the concept. I think that the feedback I heard, or the message I heard, was that this particular project might not be ready to pursue at this time, based on additional, analysis and research and decision making that lies ahead, decisions we haven't reached yet, and that is a proposal to expand the Four Corners water and sewer service area, bringing service further west on Route 44 to basically the Hunting Lodge Road area, and in particular providing service to the area in and around Goodwin School. With the thought process being that that particular area of town is an area we would like to see additional growth and development, and in particular affordable housing propagation in that particular area. The project was estimated to be roughly $3 million. I had proposed $2.25 million to come from rescue plan funds, and that would have necessitated another $750,000 to come from other funding sources, which could have been assessments on property owners in that area, or other state or federal grants. And again, the goal was to provide an incentive for developers of affordable housing to pursue redevelopment of properties in that area at the northern end of Hunting Lodge Road. Council expressed, I think, some conceptual support for the project, but it seemed a little premature at this point, given the uncertain future of exactly what the town will ultimately do with the Goodwin School property once the new elementary school comes online. And so with that in mind, I have pulled that funding from the proposal, or reallocated that funding, reprogrammed it, as it were, for other projects that we'll talk about. There are actually three proposals or projects that were part of the original set of proposals that have been pulled and have been reallocated. Those three are shown here, the biggest of which I already talked about. The other two are the White Oaks condominium wastewater system. You'll recall that they're looking to put in a new system. The town council had granted approval some years back for a new private septic system to go in on town-owned land. And that project, which I believe is around a $1.3 million budget, we were approached by White Oaks condominium representatives saying they were concerned about the project budget and wanted to know if the town was in a position to financially help with that project in any way. So the original proposal you heard from me did include some funding to offset some of those costs. The idea being, though, that it wouldn't just be straight financial support, i.e. using public funds to support the needs of what is a private development, but actually in exchange for that funding support, ask White Oak condominiums to deed restrict a certain number of their units as affordable housing. So that would be available as affordable housing stock in perpetuity into the future. And basically, long story short, we had difficulty trying to figure out what I'll call the right exchange rate, trying to figure out if we provided funding support in this amount, how many units would be an appropriate number of units to expect to be deeded as affordable housing in exchange for that. And I think there was just, uncertainty and confusion and maybe a lack of comfort all the way around. Again, a good idea, right idea, but maybe just hard logistically to figure out how best to pull off in an equitable way. And in addition, while we were having these discussions, we received word that White Oaks condominiums basically had figured out a way to fund the project on their own, and so town financial support wasn't necessarily the linchpin anymore. And so for those reasons, we've essentially kind of moved away from that being a part of what's being proposed to you all now. And then lastly, and I think I already signaled this to you back in January, so just to reiterate, so this isn't a change. I just want to restate that premium pay for municipal and school district essential workers, that my original proposed use of ARPA funds for that, I'm also rescinding that request, in large part because I think that to the extent the council wishes to still provide consideration for the merits of that, I would suggest the council do that outside the confines of the rescue plan. Basically, consider using other available funds to do that if the council supports doing that. And that's in part because the federal rule was, as you'll recall, I described it being highly restrictive in terms of what is or who is defined as an essential worker. So it really boiled down to, I believe, public safety employees, police and fire employees, public health workers, and I believe social service workers were the third category. It's basically just three categories of employees. And so using teachers as an example, I don't believe teachers would have qualified as essential workers, and so they wouldn't have been eligible for those funds. And that altogether made me feel that it wasn't a good fit, because the council was pretty clear that if funding, COVID pay, premium pay, whatever you want to call it, for essential workers was to be done, I believe you all wanted a pretty broad definition of essential workers, and ARPA wasn't providing that. So that's why I proposed moving away from it. So now I want to transition into what is being proposed. And some of these numbers you're going to see, they are, basically tallies that represent the lump sum of items that are individually broken out in the handout that I circulated to you earlier. So hopefully everybody has that as a reference that you can look at, and we can certainly dive into this in more detail. But the first category or constellation of things, and this is within the eligible use area of supporting public health response, is municipal facility upgrades. That spans a large number of projects, and all told rolls up to about $969,500. That includes about $350,000 for facility improvements to the Mansfield Public Library, a little over $91,000 of improvements to the Mansfield Community Center, $45,000 in improvements to the municipal offices, which would include HVAC upgrades in the council chambers, upgrades to the sleeping quarters and lockers of Fire Station 307, which is our primary fire station. $200,000 for sleeping quarter upgrades and restroom upgrades for our DPW garage. I should note that all of those, again, because of the nature of what's being proposed, it would be intended to improve public safety, help guard against the spread of a future pandemic by helping to, scrub the air, handle the air, and separate people physically, while they're sleeping, or otherwise, just reduce rates of possible transmission of different things. It also programs funding for the next phase of our ongoing municipal facilities schematic design work. This amount that I programmed in is somewhat of a placeholder number. We're still working with our architect on the first phase of the project, which is basically the needs assessment. And so this is anticipating, as best I can right now, where things would be going from here. But knowing that, a large chunk of the design work and the construction of any, town buildings in the future will be geared towards trying to make the facilities safer for employees and the public, again, with an eye towards future pandemic. It seemed appropriate to include funding for that purpose here. This category also includes $415,000. Oh, sorry, transitioning to the next category now. Fire and EMS apparatus and equipment upgrades. So everything I just read through is in the category of municipal facility upgrades, that $969,000 figure. This proposal includes funding for a new ambulance or replacement of ambulance 707, which I believe has been in service for almost a decade now. It also includes extrication equipment and other fire and EMS equipment that's detailed in the handout that I sent you. And I believe Chief Mitchell's on the phone if there are questions about specifically some of those needs that we'll get into in a little bit. Funding for human services mobile outreach vehicle. This would be done. The idea is a cooperative effort between the town's Human Services Department and Mansfield Board of Education to provide a vehicle and materials that are needed to perform mobile human and social service outreach programming, and basically allow us to go reach people where they are, as opposed to expecting them to come to where we are to receive assistance. And some of the ways that service will be provided, again, detailed in the handout. This funding proposes $100,000 enhanced funding support for our municipal human service programs, with a particular eye toward nutritional programming and the Mansfield Farms to Families program. But there are other areas that this funding could be used as well. That's just provided as kind of a, a cornerstone example of one of the ways that additional funding could be used to enhance or make more robust the services that our Human Services Department is already providing our citizens. And then finally, funding in the amount of $20,000, basically to help cover costs that we've incurred from a variety of events associated with our direct response to the pandemic. The council is aware that, we've done mass distribution of test kits. We've done public education. We've done other activities that the town has incurred costs as a result. And so this is intended to help us recover some of those costs, some of those bills that we footed along the way. And these are all green because the color coding system, which I know makes this document look a little bit like a rainbow. Everything in this category essentially can be accomplished within 1 year of the time the funding is approved. So these are things that could be acted on relatively quickly. In some cases, it might, be a little outside of 1 year. Thinking about the ambulance as an example, it always takes a little longer to procure a vehicle than we'd like, but we certainly could get the funds obligated within that stretch of time, even if the vehicle didn't become go into service within that first year. So moving on to the next category, this is in the eligible use area of addressing negative economic impacts. First item here is funding support for area social service agencies. This was clearly a priority of the council that you all expressed at many points along the way when we were talking about ARPA and council meetings. And so this would be funding to go to area and local social service agencies that work with residents of our community. I want to stress that I think in order to feel comfortable about passing along this amount of funding to partner agencies and nonprofits that we work with, we would want to have pretty clear criteria laid out and expect those agencies that we work with to demonstrate a direct benefit for the work that they're doing in exchange for the funds. So we want to make sure that it's not just a situation where we provide funding and hope for the best, but that we actually, for lack of a better term, attach some strings to those funds to make sure that the town of Mansfield is definitely receiving quality return on that investment. Funding for affordable housing activities. The council is obviously aware that you recently established an affordable housing trust fund to serve, sort of as a repository for funding for affordable housing projects. So the mechanics of this would still need to be discussed to see, again, to make sure we're doing this in a way that satisfies the eligibility criteria. But, basically, however the money, specifically flows, the idea is to invest these funds in affordable housing projects or projects that promote affordable housing. Business relief and facade improvement funds. This is, money to help our local businesses that have suffered during the pandemic. Maybe they're businesses that had to defer maintenance on their buildings. Maybe they had to lay off staff. Maybe they had to delay, the introduction of a new product line. The list kind of goes on and on. We had talked at one point about facade improvement grants. Unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily look like, because there's specific eligibility criteria for us to provide funding support for facade improvements. And so when the time comes, we can have Cynthia weigh in on that, but it certainly at this point looks like Mansfield might not be a candidate for that based on our sort of the condition of our economics. But this is, basically intended to provide a shot in the arm of our local businesses and recognition that, businesses not just in the downtown area, but throughout town have experienced varying degrees of hardship. And so, we've put together, which I can certainly share with the council, kind of a rough draft, if you will, on, what that program might look like, what criteria and eligible use categories there would be, what sort of criteria businesses have to satisfy just to be eligible to apply, and then how funds can be used. But in looking at what other municipalities across the state have done, a $10,000 cap or thereabouts on individual awards would seem to be relatively reasonable based on what we've read read about in other communities. That helps us, spread that around to a wider swath of local businesses. Next, and this is one of the new items that wasn't a part of prior recommendations on my part, and that's direct financial assistance to economically distressed individuals. Our planning and development staff in particular in recent months, administering the Helping Hand program that's being funded with Small Cities Grant Dollars, CDBG, Small Cities Grant Dollars. In the course of working with economically distressed individuals, and in the course of the individuals that have sought assistance, verifying for our record keeping purposes that they are in fact Mansfield residents, one of the things that happens in the course of that is they may be providing our staff with copies of their utility bills that show their address and confirm that they're a Mansfield resident. And just in the course of looking at those records, those documents, and confirming people's residency, our staff have noticed that many people have staggering utility bills that they're way behind on. And so one of the ways, or one of the uses of ARPA funds that's an eligible use area is helping people, that are in these situations, whether it's, utility bills that are in arrears or people that are in arrears with their rent and mortgage payments and a wide range of other things that are detailed in the handout that I sent. We could even consider the possibility of including, fee waivers for Mansfield Community Center membership or youth camps in here as well. I don't know if I specifically listed that in the document, but again, trying to provide financial support directly to individuals and families that need it. This category also includes the Digital Inclusion Initiative, basically trying to expand our network of public broadband and Wi-Fi access. I'm not going to go into all the reasons. I've done this in a previous meeting, all the aims we're trying to accomplish in doing this, but I would point out that this particular proposal was previously housed in the infrastructure funding section, and I've since moved it to this category, this addressing negative economic impacts category, because while it is broadband infrastructure that we're talking about, it actually seems to be a better fit for this category. And either way, it would seem to be an eligible use, but it seems to be more appropriately integrated in this particular funding. Moving on to a neighborhood plan for the Hunting Lodge Road area. And this actually ties back to the fact that the council, perhaps rightly or rightly, expressed concern about funding at this time a water sewer system expansion in the Four Corners to serve this particular area because the future and the vision for that part of town was a little murky at the moment. This funding would actually be intended to clear up the murk, to provide clarity for us to establish a plan and a vision for that portion of town. And this would be essentially, think of it as a master plan for that part of town and to ensure that future development and redevelopment plans of that area meet both neighborhood needs, but also align with the town's plan of conservation and development. This category also includes $75,000 in arts relief fund with a particular eye towards not just funding support to local arts organizations, but actually working with local organizations to promote public art. I think in a previous meeting I talked about as an example, so I don't want to get too specific, but as an example, if it's not logistically feasible because of, I think it would be DOT restrictions in this case, to install vegetative buffers and vegetative shielding in the Four Corners area because of the proximity to 195 and 44. Public art could be installed in that area to accomplish some of the same objectives that vegetation would, but it wouldn't be, you're not installing something with ground penetrating roots that causes problem. It's something that can be affixed to the surface at ground level. So that's one area. And obviously the town of Mansfield has, a pretty deep appreciation for the arts in general. And this would go toward, us sort of meeting our goal or meeting the goal at a local level of 1% ARPA funding for the arts, which I believe is sort of a national benchmark that arts organizations across the country have been pursuing. So 75,000 roughly equates to 1% of our overall ARPA funding. This proposal also includes $850,000 in funding for Mansfield Parks and Recreation master planning and the improvements that would come, the priority improvements that would be identified as part of that master planning process. And so, there are a lot of ideas and thoughts have been shared in terms of priority upgrades, if you will, to our recreational assets. Some examples that have been cited would be improvements, lighting improvements as one example to our Little League ball fields. But there are other areas that have been identified, sports courts, improvements in terms of access to town-owned open space, so our trails, and just the big picture being that, and I think Deputy Mayor Shaken touched on this last night, actually, but this COVID experience has really highlighted the importance, the public health and both physical and mental health importance of open space and of recreation, outdoor recreation. And so I think a robust investment in our open space assets, our recreational assets, would very much be in keeping with the spirit of the rescue plan. And then finally in this category, and this again was a project you guys have already seen before, a proposal you've already seen before, but this proposes $750,000 in funding support toward the Eagleville Green project, and that's a 42-unit mixed income multifamily residential project on South Eagleville Road. It's a $15 million overall project budget, and a lot of this funding would go towards helping to facilitate improved connection to public sewer systems, but essentially it would be the town stepping up to try to really help get that project across the finish line, because as I think we've talked about before, it's a long road to the $15 million needed to pull the project off. And in many cases, the ability to get additional grant funding for the project requires the applicant to show proof of other areas of matching dollars. And so hopefully these dollars could be leveraged for other funding support, whether they be public or private sources. Third of four eligible use categories is replacing revenue loss. So I want to spend a couple minutes on this because there have been some changes worth pointing out. Changes from when the interim rule was published to when the final rule came out more recently. And whereas the interim rule basically said that you had to calculate how much revenue you quote unquote lost based on a formula or approach that was dictated, and there was an inflation escalator you could use, and it wasn't overly complicated, but it was a little cumbersome, and certainly lots of opportunity for a municipality and the Treasury to end up in disagreement over what the proper calculation was. The final rule simplified things quite a bit and said, you as a municipality can go through the more complicated calculation process as was laid out in the interim rule, or behind door number 2, you could invoke what's referred to as a standard allowance. And that standard allowance, think standard deduction, I guess, in your taxes might be a good analogy, allows you to, instead of doing the calculation, claim an amount that is either equal to $10 million or 100% of the municipality's total rescue plan allocation. So in our case, that's $7.54 million. So, it is, within the council's prerogative, you could put in for $7.54 million of revenue loss recovery and use our entire allocation that way. We're not proposing, staff is not proposing that you do that, but we are proposing that $1 million of our ARP allocation be used to replace lost revenue from 2020 and 2021. In particular, I would point to some of the enhanced financial support that the general fund provided to the Parks and Rec Fund to wipe its negative fund balance clean. And so those are funds, subsidization, I guess you could say, from the general fund that has been done over the last couple of years that could be reasonably argued should be reimbursed. But the funds recovered or lost revenue that's recovered must be used for a quote general government service. And a general government service is defined as any service traditionally provided by a government, with a few exceptions that the Treasury has identified. But basically, it means anything that a municipality typically does, even if it's doing something it typically does in an enhanced way, would be an eligible use of these funds. So literally, the full gamut of municipal services that we provide, which means that it'd be very easy for us or any municipality to use that money. But a couple items that are also built into this is $25,000 in funding support for financial consulting services that we've discussed for Parks and Rec. Actually, she said Parks and Rec, not just Mansfield Community Center, although the community center is a big part of it. So I shouldn't say MCC, that should actually say Parks and Recreation Financial Consulting Services. And then $100,000 for installation of electric vehicle charging stations. We obviously have several of these in town, but the town of Mansfield and the town council very committed to environmental sustainability. And one way we can continue to make progress, on our energy sustainability goals is by making EV charging stations more ubiquitous, more widely available throughout town. And so this does propose $100,000 for that. And how far the $100,000 goes really depends on what sort of charging stations would be installed. There are different levels in terms of how quickly a vehicle gets charged. And of course, those that charge a vehicle more quickly, i.e. level 3, which charges a vehicle in 2 to 3 hours, cost a lot more than ones that take a better part of a day. And then finally, this was one of the projects that was included in the previous presentation, but it was on a list of projects that I believe I said were deferred or tabled or set aside and didn't get picked the first go around. But this has been given some more thought, a little more analysis, and extending the public water system. This would be Connecticut Water. Extending it to service Mansfield Middle School. And I should point out, not just Mansfield Middle School, but it would obviously be available to service residential property owners along the way. A project that's roughly $2.5 million, estimated $2.5 million, proposing to program half of that cost, $1.25 million from ARPA, to bring water to Mansfield Middle School. And that's basically in large part to address a history of water quality issues that Mansfield Middle School has experienced. We've had positive coliform hits. There's been bacteria hits over the years. Recent tests, I believe, did come back clean, but there's, I guess, what you could consider to be a high degree of volatility in the water quality over there, and connecting to public water system, a commercial system that's professionally managed, professionally maintained, would just really make the water quality at the middle school much more consistent and take out a lot of that volatility and uncertainty and concerns around it. And I know Mansfield Public Schools and Superintendent Lyman strongly support this project. So, and just also to mention, there are a couple different parcels in close proximity to Mansfield Middle School, privately owned parcels, multifamily developments that, as Rob Taylor has explained to me, have water issues, documented water issues, and I think water scarcity in particular. So having public water service that's going to the middle school also service those properties along the way would be an additional benefit and potentially help them out of a bind that they're in. So this is just a summary of everything that I went through. Again, the town's total rescue plan allocation is $7.54 million. The sum total of everything I just reviewed is a little over 7.5 million. And so that leaves, just under $30,000 as sort of residual or contingencies, whatever you want to call it. But I want to thank, all the members of our team, management team, the department heads that have been meeting with me regularly, have put in the time and energy to prepare proposals, to justify those proposals, to furnish backup information as needed, so that I and ultimately the council could understand what the various needs were. And that's being done in addition to their already demanding day jobs. And so I just really want to thank every member of my team for their contributions, and hopefully the council finds this information very helpful. This is a revised slide of what you saw previously, but I just wanted to again put in front of the council some of the other projects that are still out there, still have been considered this latest go around, but are still kind of on the sidelines as at least as far as I'm concerned. I would not recommend moving on them at this time. And that's actually because some of these would be great candidates for funding from some of the other new federal funding streams that are coming available. I talked last night about the bipartisan infrastructure law and funding for roads, bridges, culverts, broadband, water, sewer, renewable energy, energy efficiency, all these things. Many of these projects you see on the list here would actually be good candidates for that. And so I think, in addition to maybe not being at the tip top of our priority list from an ARPA funding standpoint, some of these would be, great candidates for funding for some of those other emerging federal pots of money. And so with that, I think that would be a good place to put a pin in my presentation and start discussion.
All right, questions for the town manager? Mr. Osberger? You're muted, Charlie.
Get out of the share screen thing, maybe, or are we going to refer back to things?
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure. I'll stop the share, and if anybody wants me to go back, I can.
Either way, I've got a pile. Did we ever come up with an idea of what specifically were going to be considered essential workers?
So yeah, I thought I spoke to that a moment ago, but I believe that at least under an earlier version of the federal rule, if not also the final rule, the definition of an essential worker was basically three different categories of workers: public safety, i.e., police and fire; public health, so think Eastern Highlands Health District; and social services, social workers. So large chunks of our municipal workforce that are, out there working at the front lines, public works, transfer station attendants, school teachers, etc., would not have met the definition of an essential worker.
Secondly, sleeping quarters in the Department of Public Works. I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, so I see John's on, so I'll let him or a member of his team speak to this in a bit more detail. But we obviously run crews long hours during the winter months when there's plowing activity going on. It's not safe for people to plow for 36 hours straight. They need a rest. They don't go home when they do that. We have sleeping quarters in our DPW garage now, as do many or perhaps most public works garages that I'm familiar with, at least in New England, where you get a lot of snow. And so what we have now, though, are really inadequate sleeping quarters. There's no, gender separation. There's very little separation in general. And so there's, a potential for, if somebody's sick, for that, contagion to run rampant throughout the facility. But I see John just came online, so I'll let him speak to that.
I think Ryan covered it, but it's, during a snow event, a major snow event, or a hurricane, tornado, something where, we're at work for continuous days, the crew needs somewhere to sleep. They can't sleep in their trucks. They do right now, but with COVID, we couldn't pack them in like we have done in the past, where they're all up in the break room area or different areas of the garage, and just having something a little more ideal and safe is something, if we can do, it would definitely help us out if we ever face another pandemic.
All right. Hey, thanks, John. The sewer project that was scrapped for Hunting Lodge Road from the Four Corners, or at least down the 44 corridor, since it was scrapped, where did that money get reallocated to?
So let's see, some of that would have gone to the public water system extension to Mansfield Middle School. Some of that would have gone to the Parks and Recreation master planning and recreation and open space asset improvements. Some of that would have gone to additional funding for local business assistance, the direct financial assistance to economically disadvantaged individuals and families. And then I believe the remainder were in the areas of the municipal facilities, many of the municipal facilities improvements that I discussed. We just talked about one of them, the DPW garage, sleeping quarters improvements, but some of the other items in there as well.
Okay. We spoke of the Hunting Lodge Road neighborhood plan. What exactly is that?
Okay. I believe, let's see if Linda is here. I'm not sure if Linda is or not. But basically, as I said in the presentation, oh, there she is. Well, why don't you go for it, Linda?
So the neighborhood plan is something that we've been talking about because I think, as many of you know, the neighborhoods west of campus are really in need of some stabilization. And with Goodwin School closing, they're losing the one community and civic anchor that they have. So we're seeing a lot of pressure on rental housing for more development. And so the thought here was, especially given the discussions around concern of extending sewer without knowing in what that might bring if we just extended sewer without a plan, to actually create a plan working with the neighborhoods to come up with a master plan that says, okay, this is what we're looking for in terms of housing. So facilitating affordable housing, at the same time working on improvements that will help stabilize that neighborhood and really help revitalize it again. So there has been a lot of rental investment. Not all those properties are well maintained. The homeowners that are there are expressing concerns. We know that some of them have been receiving letters from realtors just offering cash deals for their houses with no, sight unseen. And so there's a lot of concern about what the plans are for Goodwin and how we can, really make sure that this remains a neighborhood.
Yeah, and I can attest to that because I get about one phone call a day, somebody offering me a cash deal for my house. Yeah. And I'm in that neighborhood, so I can agree with you. And is that the specifics of where the plan is just to give site improvement? Is it site improvements or what is it?
I think it's really looking and saying let's do a plan and come up with, and again, trying to build consensus with everyone in terms of, okay, here's what we want to happen, and then doing the regulations and the design standards that go with that. So we're presenting that to developers as well as working with the council as part of the facilities reuse, the reuse of Goodwin School. What do we want to have happen here? Before you put infrastructure in to facilitate anything, let's make sure we're giving a clear vision and direction to say, if you want to build, here are the rules, here's what we're looking for in a way that will stabilize the neighborhood and not create further concern that we're going to continue to see degradation and less maintenance of properties.
Okay, any specifics? Is there something
that's the point of doing the plan, is to develop the specifics. So there's that we're not walking into this with any preconceived notions. It's literally to develop a plan that will then and regulations to implement that plan, as well as identify any public improvements that are needed.
I mean, it's literally my backyard, so I have some concerns.
Well, and again, that's why we're talking about a plan, so that we can engage the residents in the community and the property owners in what needs to happen there. So we're not coming in with a proposal at this point.
And literally my mother's front yard, as her house is directly across from Goodwin School. I mean, we have concerns there as to what the procedure going forward would be for its demise, so to speak.
Mr. Osberger, you've had 3 questions and there are other council members waiting. Can we go on to somebody else and come back to you?
That would be fine, yes.
Mr. Bruder, followed by Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to build off the DPW sleeping arrangements, I remember a tour that I had when I first got elected, and it was something that was needed then. But in looking at this proposal, I just wanted to say thank you to our town manager and all the directors, because a lot of detail went into it, and I'm really excited to see the Ecolville Green Project funding support, specifically that, we're going to get that started. But is there any discussion in terms of what other sources the town can provide or that they're looking for in terms of that $15 million price tag?
So there is a matrix, a table that I know Linda shared with me at one point that had a breakdown of at least what I think you could say were the hoped for or the targeted funding sources. So Linda, I don't know if you're able to speak to that off the cuff.
Sure. So as part of the Connecticut Communities Challenge Grant application that we filed, we did identify that it was part of the process was to go through and identify potential funding sources. So right now, I believe they're seeking about 8.4 million, roughly in that area, from the State Department of Housing and the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. So that's the funding they're seeking from them. Actually, I take that back. It might be 12 combined. It may be eight from one, 4 from another. So, and then we did ask for money through the Connecticut Community Challenge Grant. And I think as part of that, we had identified potentially another 150,000, which might come from the Housing Trust Fund if we have funding there, or potentially through ARPA funds for affordable housing activities. So I think we're trying to work on the sewer piece, which Ryan described in that Eagleville Green component. They are also receiving funds from Eversource. So they've received $177,000 from Eversource, a grant there, and have a few smaller money grants. But, I think one of the things that we've done to try and move that along is we have, I believe, Ryan, you sent a letter to the Commissioner of Housing, supporting the project and strongly encouraging and requesting that they provide that funding. And again, we'll hear, and I believe April or May, regarding the Connecticut Communities Challenge Grant. And then that would come back, if an award were offered, it would come back to you based on the resolution that you had adopted as to whether to accept it and provide the match for those projects.
And that's actually something probably goes without saying, but I guess I should probably put a somewhat finer point on this and say that while everybody is optimistic and very much rooting for the project, and that's obviously why, as Linda said, we applied for a multi-million-dollar grant in partnership with a number of partners to make this happen. If we reach a point where the future of the project seems that much more tenuous, and perhaps the outcome of the Connecticut Community Challenge Grant in the next few months will be a kind of a bellwether of sorts. This would be an example of proposed funding that I think would be reasonable for the council to revisit and discuss about what it wants to do.
I really appreciate Linda and Ryan, both of your feedback on that. It's an exciting project that I'm glad to see that funds from this was allocated towards it, and I'm always on board with being optimistic for sure. And Mayor, may I have one more question, or do you want to? Okay, thank you. And Ryan, for the public water system extension to the Mansfield Middle School, I'm really excited to see that. I know that that's is the newest school in town that's in operation, and to be able to add sewer to it would, I think, prolong its usefulness to us, you know, in regards to all the different things that was brought up into it. I see there's an estimate for the cost. Would all the costs only have to be paid from these ARPA funds, or would there be any money that would have to be raised through the community or through taxes or anything like that?
So right now, and you know, this is you know, I would say it's not the firmest pricing. You know, it's based on sort of industry estimates on a sort of per linear mile sort of. So I mean, I want to make sure to stress that, you know, that figure, these are round numbers we're using.
Yeah.
So $2.5 million, you know, based on the physical distance required to get there to connect the water system.
Okay.
And half of that being proposed from ARPA. The other half of the funding could come from a variety of different sources. I think there are a number of really compelling candidates, and one of the leading ones I would point to that I've already referenced is, some of the newly or emerging pots of money from the bipartisan infrastructure law. There are specific categories of funding for water and sewer projects in that. I couldn't tell you offhand how many billions nationally, but it's a large number, and Connecticut's getting a big chunk of that. And so I would think, it might not compare to, say, lead pipes in Flint, Michigan, sort of dire straits project, but we're talking about water quality at school, and the water that we give our kids is pretty important. And that's not to say that others might not have it as bad or worse than we do, but this is not a puff project. This is really trying to deliver reliably quality water to our youth.
And we're not talking sewer here. We're just talking water, right?
This is just water service. So there would be, this is not an extension of water and sewer service. It's just water.
And one of the interesting things about the infrastructure bill is if there are matches required, you can use your ARPA money for the match.
Yeah, which is not typically the case. You normally can't match federal funds with federal funds, but they've made it clear you can use ARPA funds as match for other federal dollars. Thanks for pointing that out, Mayor.
And thank you for pointing out the fact that it's just water. Either way, I think that's an exciting use of the funds. Thank you very much.
Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got quite a few questions, but
let's limit it to 3 so that we can get to somebody else.
I'm going to limit it just to the Mansfield Middle School water project. We have, it seems, at the moment, Ryan, we're talking about coliform contamination. Are there any other impurities or water quality problems other than the coliform at the present time?
Yeah, coliform and bacteria hits. That's what I'm familiar with. I know Alan's on. He might be more familiar with the history of the system. So, Alan, if there's other concerns that have been flagged.
No, but I can tell you at either Vinton or Goodwin, we've started having problems with lead. Middle school is the same vintage of school, and this would not necessarily handle that, but that's another problem that we could be facing down the road in regards to the middle school. It'd be lead in the solder in the school because of the age of the pipes. But beyond that, for the water system, it also helps us where we've had problems with losing power to that school at times. And if you lose power and especially water pressure to the school, it may not cause a contaminant, but it causes a problem to the system where we report that to the state, and then we need to take certain actions. And one of them is that you got to go through a round of testing of water again. And in the meantime, typically you got to provide separate hand washing and stations for doing that. And we provide water bubblers and so on.
Alan, to clarify coliform versus E. coli, it's my understanding that coliform is probably from decaying organic matter. It could be rotten leaves, dead mouse, as opposed to E. coli being fecal problems or human feces. What is the source of the coliform that is getting in the well, and where is it getting in?
Well, every time it happens, we have to do a research of what that potential problem was. We look for things. Sometimes it's somebody pulled a screen off someplace, and something as small as a spider can get in the system, and that would cause a problem. So I'd have to say probably about 50% of the time we find something and we fix it, and 50% of the time you don't find it particularly. But we do have to follow protocol based on what the state tells us to do, and then they watch the whole process. And if you can't clear it, then you go into what they call a stage 2 evaluation, where you have to have an outside vendor take a look at your system, and they evaluate it. And they draft a report for the state on that.
One source of contamination could be the well actually being in a pit. There's 3 wells on the property. Are they all submersible pumps with pitless adapters?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, so there's no well in a pit, so that's not a source of contamination.
No, all the wells, we had the well heads all extended above the ground also. And yes, they connect through a pitless adapter in the casing.
Very good. I just want to have one last comment before I move on to another council member. I would like to thoroughly research and do everything possible to work with the water resource that's on the property. Have we done that?
We have, and it's been actually quite a few years of working with it. We over the years, we keep encountering the problem, especially with the coliform, that does pop up usually about yearly.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Further questions? Ms. Berthelot? You're muted.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to say, as other colleagues have, to thank you, Ryan, and to all of your staff for the work that's gone into this and for listening to us and being so responsive in terms of thinking about what we're prioritizing. I have some question that it may seem kind of small. Just curious about the van for Human Services. I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around the necessity of the van, and I'm sure there's a good explanation. And I'm also thinking about the staffing of it, that if we have a van, are we going to have the appropriate folks who are going to be able to go out and do whatever it's supposed to do? But I'm just having a hard time understanding why a van is necessary for Human Services. I can see, like, for other things like meeting people on the street who are at risk for drug overdose and things like medical, but for Human Services, I'm a little puzzled.
I'll turn over to Pat because the issue just came on.
Sure. So this, not sure what happened to my camera, but it just shut me off. You can still hear me, correct?
Yes.
Yes, the system shut me off, so I'm not sure what happened there. So this was actually is a joint suggestion for use that came from the Board of Education and our department. One of the things that the board has done that we've been involved with is these kind of mini resource events that we go to neighborhoods with, that we bring information and resources out, and it was a suggestion by the superintendent that these have been so successful that we should do this in more situations. We also have done an awful lot of this around issues with food insecurity and other outreach events, particularly in the area of youth services. And it's the idea of not, that there are a lot of people that experience different kinds of barriers to coming into an office to access services and programs, and that there would be a need to take them out. It wouldn't necessarily just be our social worker going out, but it would also be our youth service staff that might provide a family event during the summertime out in a neighborhood. So that's kind of the idea. The van would also be utilized for some of our food insecurity programs where people cannot make it to a site to do pickups or access things that we could actually deliver items out to them. I'm thinking of farms to family. Roughly about a third of the people can't come to the distributions, I'll be honest with you. And so my staff have been doing those deliveries. So it wouldn't be an increase in staff because we'd use the staff we have now. It would just be a matter of going out into those neighborhoods and places to make that resource available.
I love the idea that you're all going out into the community. I think that's absolutely important, and that is the way human services has to be done. I'm still just not quite understanding the van. I mean, if we can do it by car, why do we need a van? I totally applaud this effort in terms of being out in the community, but why is it a van that's necessary?
Because of the space, we're actually not only taking people, but we're taking items and equipment out to those locations. And that would be the need for the van.
So by people, you mean a team of people from?
Yes.
Like 4 of you are going out to an event.
Right, correct.
Together.
And it could be Board of Education staff along with youth service staff. It could be a team of, the social worker from our social service side going out with, some of the youth service social workers as well. It could be to do an adventure-based activity in an area. So we know that, there's a lot of barriers as far as transportation and access to our program.
But why a $60,000 van and not a $25,000 sedan?
Well, the van really, what we're talking about when you're talking about bringing out products and distributions, it can't be a sedan. That I can guarantee you. They don't work.
So I hear the food, which I don't know how frequently that happens, but like what other products are you bringing that need to be in a van?
So if we're doing it, let's say we're doing adventure-based activities, there's a lot of equipment that you need to bring out with you to do those types of things, particularly in a neighborhood. So that would be it. So it would be not only transporting staff but supplies. And equipment, and again, deliverables if we're doing a distribution. And it could be food, it could be arts and crafts supplies, it could be, like I said, equipment to provide an activity. It could actually be transporting a small group.
Can you give me an example of equipment that needs to be in a van?
Sure. So if we were going to do an activity where it required us to bring tables for setup, and it required us to bring some of the adventure-based equipment that we have to transport, it's quite large, that you would need to set up. I'm talking about, if any of you are familiar with ropes course and adventure-based activities, some of what they would call the low ropes activities that are pretty transportable. As well as if we are doing some type of a distribution.
Okay, Pat, thank you. That's super helpful.
Okay.
Mr. Shuren, I will get to you, Mr. Osberger, but I want to let people who haven't had a chance to speak yet go first. Mr. Shuren?
I didn't have a question. I just had a comment with regards to Terry's thing and with regards to Pat's thing.
Let me let Mr. Shuren go first and then come back.
Okay.
Just on the financial assistance to the economically distressed, echoing a conversation we had last evening, how is that going to be made known to all possibly eligible clientele?
So I think my response there would be that's a very, reasonable question and certainly something that would need to be, fleshed out and vetted as part of our planning. But for the purposes of this discussion, I guess my sort of guidance to staff was, for the most part, we refrained because of the time commitment, frankly, from diving into some of the granular logistical details until we knew that there was support for a concept.
Sure.
So
fine.
absolutely happy to say that if it's something the council wants us to move forward with, we would develop an implementation plan associated with that. We're just
That's
not there
fine.
yet.
Just the other small point, all the elements here are things I'm fine with, except that I have some concerns about mortgage principal reduction. And we can talk about that later.
Yeah, I think Linda can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know this for sure, but it's possible that for the most part anyway, the items that are listed in bulleted format here may have actually been excerpted out from the federal rule. So it wasn't so much that we were identifying them as these are the priorities. We were just kind of lifting verbatim, like, well, the federal rule says that this is okay.
Okay.
Correct.
She's
That's just from the rule.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Osberger, go ahead.
Oh, as I recall, and I don't know if Pat is still on, I know that there were a lot of social programs that my daughter was involved with, in particular, out to the Girl Scout camp and out to Rectory camp in the summer. And also they had the Mansfield Challenge, which required a van and moving several people. And I would imagine that would be one of the other many uses that they would require a van for and have used in the past.
You are correct. And again, this van could be used for transporting youth to, we do have a couple of programs that we actually take youth out to. Basically, all of my youth service staff have public service license, as well as some good portion of the staff at the senior center.
Okay, further questions? I have a question, Mr. Aylesworth. One of my concerns is that this is an allocation for a year or two, and it involves hiring staff. Are you, particularly the expansion in human services, and I'm wondering, are you proposing a one-year program and then we would pick it up, or how do we continue some of these things?
So are we talking about specifically the human services piece?
Well, that was the one that leaped to mind, but in general.
Yeah. So the only area where I think there would be some sort of operational, i.e. staff or contractor support in any of this that I can recall offhand would be the funding that's proposed for Mansfield Farms to Families. So there would be potentially some additional short-term beefing up of personnel for implementation of that. But as Pat was saying, as far as the van goes, that would not require, we're not contemplating additional staff in order to make that work. And there, to be honest, there are aspects of the direct financial assistance to distressed individuals that, that's not driving a proposed increase in staffing. There's discussions happening now as part of the normal budget process, both in Linda's shop and Human Services about staffing needs longer term. But if this were funded, if this was allocated, then potentially, if there was council support for those additional investments in the operating budget, again, as part of the normal budgeting process, that additional staff would be used to support this. So, but I at this point, I'm comfortable with the focus that these requests have on tangible things and not the people that are required to make those things happen.
All right. Further questions? Mr. Coleman.
Yes, this question is probably for John Carrington. In regards to the restroom upgrades at the Public Works Department, is there gender separation needed there? Is there a women's facility? Are they ADA compliant? What sort of upgrades are we talking there? And I don't want to make this a Title VII question, but just how many female employees other than administrators are working for the DPW?
John, I think your mic's not on.
You don't look muted, but we're not hearing you. Oh, yeah. Did you turn on your earphones?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we have one female truck driver at the garage. So when there's long events, she needs facilities. Right now, there's a separate restroom, but not a shower facility. So we're in the process of actually getting that constructed. That was approved in a capital improvement, I think, 2 years ago, to build 3 separate restrooms upstairs for the crew. I believe because it's a government facility for just government employees, doesn't have to be ADA compliant, because none of our workers right now, nobody could do the job with a disability. Someday, if they invent trucks that do all that, maybe that'd be an issue. But right now, I don't think it's an issue.
And that's mandated by the government that you don't have to be ADA compliant because a truck driver can't be disabled. I'm a little confused on that.
I'm not too up on it, but I know in the military, we did not have to have ADA compliant facilities. I assume the same thing would apply to our Public Works garage. There's a bathroom available on the first floor that would be for anybody, but for the workers, I don't think every restroom has to be ADA compliant.
Attorney Deneen, I was just say Attorney Deneen is here. I don't know, not to put Kevin on the spot, but Kevin may be better versed in ADA compliance.
Are you here?
Thank you. Yep, there we go. I'll have to take the specifics of a non-public access municipal building. I have to take a look at it. I don't know the answer to that one off the top of my head. Because it's not the ADA generally applies to public facilities or publicly access facilities, but I'm not exactly sure how that fits in, but I'll look into that.
Yeah, this facility is not open to the public.
Correct.
Okay, you'll have an answer for us, Mr. Deneen?
Yes, I'll follow up on that, Mr. Coleman.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, further questions. I'm interested in the grants to businesses. Have we worked those out? And also, do we have any kind of idea of what the grants to human services agencies would look like?
So as far as grants to human service agencies is concerned, again, if there's support for the concept or the council says, yes, we want to do that, and this amount of money seems appropriate, I would expect a collaborative process working with Human Services Advisory Committee and other stakeholders to kind of come up with, basically an implementation plan and criteria and basically just, program architecture for that. As far as the local businesses assistance program goes, yes, Madam Mayor, we have a sort of a working draft of a framework for that in terms of eligibility. Holding it now. I was working on some of this actually today, so I'm happy to push it out by email for the council to look at. But just rattling off some examples of things in terms of who we might envision being eligible to apply. We're thinking businesses that are located in Mansfield that have been paying taxes in town and have been in operation for a minimum of 2 years. businesses that are no more than 25 full-time employees or full-time equivalents, because we think the focus should be on smaller businesses, not corporate chains, at least for this particular program. So along those same lines, likely businesses that don't generate more than $2 million annual gross revenue, being good standing with the Connecticut Department of Revenue, being compliant with Connecticut Department of Labor Office unemployment assistance and other applicable labor laws, priority being given to certified minority or women-owned business enterprises and certified small business enterprises and veteran-owned businesses. And in terms of award amounts, the $10,000 cap seems to be appropriate, and we would anticipate that if that were the case, that most of the award amounts would probably be in the $2,500 to $5,000 range. So reserving those $10,000 awards for sort of exceptional circumstances. In terms of
what is this money to be used for? I mean, $5,000, $10,000 is nothing to a company that's got $10,000 in arrears rent.
Well, again, we were anticipating that largely smaller businesses would take advantage of these monies. This proposed structure, that I'm describing is largely mirroring, what we've seen other municipalities do. So it's a formula that seems to have worked over the past year in other municipalities. Obviously, we could break from that. We could do fewer awards and do larger amounts. This is just basically something for the purposes of discussion. There's, nothing is in any way set in concrete here. But payroll costs, rent and mortgage assistance, utilities, employee protection expenditures, there's a pretty lengthy list of marketing and recovered costs for, again, if there was a delay in a planned business expansion, that they can document that was a result of the pandemic, something that they planned to do. Maybe it was, a building addition or an expansion of service that was delayed or deferred as a result of the pandemic. That seems to be in keeping with this. So those are just, examples, but again, this, and I will just call it a framework. It's certainly not fully fleshed out at this point, but happy to push this out for the council to review and get a sense of the structure that we would propose.
Okay, this is a personal opinion, but I am very much opposed to doling out tons of money that are so small that it costs the business as much as they're getting to do them. And that's particularly true if we're asking for full accountability and documentation and all sorts of things. So I would really ask that both in our human services grants and in this grant, we move away from these piddling little amounts that are actually more trouble than they're worth. Mr. Coleman?
Yes, I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask questions, but if no one's asking questions, I'll continue to ask. This is kind of in regards to the Mansfield Middle School water, as well as the roads. I think I saw in Ryan's report that it would take 2 to 4 years to install that water line. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, these are sort of, it's a ballpark, but just considering, the, review, design, approval processes that have to take place. So it's not just a matter of, putting pipe in the ground, there could be in some cases, land that maybe has to be acquired, in a right of way, all these sorts of little things that just would add to the timeline. And I'm not sure if this particular project would be required for a SEPA, Connecticut Environmental Policy Act review, but basically just design and permitting and those sorts of things could very well, make this a 3-year project in any case.
Would we be digging up the new Maple Road that was installed?
I don't believe this timeline would interfere, would potentially dovetail nicely with work that would be done, at least on the the latter phases of Maple Road. But I guess John could speak to that.
As far as I know, the route was going to be down Davis Road.
Yeah, there's a couple of routes that we've discussed, so that was actually a good point. So one option is coming up Maple Road, basically from 275. Another was actually extending down 195 and then coming in the Spring Hill direction. And actually, I think all costs being roughly equal, an advantage potentially of doing that way would be bringing public water service to Fire Station 307.
So we do have an alternative. We have
Yes.
a new road. We don't have to dig up Maple Road if that's.
There are a couple routes to get to the same point that carry roughly the same cost.
Okay. Did we allocate any ARPA funds to road improvements?
There's nothing in these proposals for road improvements.
I find that unfortunate because our roads are in such poor shape in town. I would like you to reconsider that, and we should discuss putting some of the ARPA funds towards the road. I did formulate a few questions for John. It's kind of a complicated thing. I mean, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said in the April 12th town council meeting, the town's ability with labor was between $1 and $2 million worth of work that you could do in a season.
Yes, that's based on drainage work. Every road pretty much needs new drainage, either to replace what's there or add new drainage, and that's what holds up the paving process. So another paving crew would solve that problem. I mean, another drainage crew, excuse me.
So given that fact and the possibility of infrastructure funding coming in, we don't have enough labor to improve more than $2 million worth of road. We'll never catch up, is how I see it. We're not going to catch up with our problems with only having the ability to do $1 to $2 million worth of road work. Is that correct?
I just want to point out that so playing out in parallel fashion right now, the departments have submitted their operating budget requests, and part of that process on an annual basis includes what we call service improvements. That may include additional investment in additional employees. And so without getting into something that's sort of unresolved and still very much being discussed at a staff level, i.e., John and I and Charmaine, just want to make sure you're aware, Councilor Coleman, that there has been a service improvement request this year for additional staffing to enable the sorts of things that you're talking about with respect to DPW.
I also remind you that there's another pot of money coming, which is in transportation funding, and there's money through LOTSIP. There's another number of sources that are specifically allocated for transportation and roads, which where there are equally large amounts of money to ARPA. And remember that ARPA is specifically recovery from the pandemic rather than capital projects improvements for the sake of capital projects improvements. So I think that we can't ask this ARPA money to do everything because there is other money coming.
Yeah, there are basically three reasons why road projects weren't included in this. Mayor, you touched on one. So when you look at the eligible use categories that I started the presentation off with, while infrastructure is a category, emphasis is on water, sewer, stormwater, and broadband infrastructure. So roads and bridges are not an eligible category in of themselves. So there was that consideration that it was not, identified as sort of a priority funding area. So that means you'd have to kind of figure out an indirect way, a roundabout way to potentially use ARPA funds to do that. My sense in conversations with the council over the past several months is that, there was not a lot of support for funding what I think was deemed traditional infrastructure type projects with ARPA funds, that we wanted to do community stimulus. And so, those were, a couple of the reasons. And then the third one, the mayor just said, which is in more recent times, the news that, these emerging funds for infrastructure, specifically federal funds, were on the way. It seemed that there was a high probability that we would be successful in getting funding for priority road improvement projects through other means.
And the transportation bill that was passed includes allocations over a 5-year period. The ARPA money is just 1 or 2 years. So there's going to be a continuing stream, plus the fact that our pilot money has increased. So there'll be some other opportunities to do some of these other road work issues over the next year or two. And we certainly understand the importance of it. We've been talking about the condition of the roads for at least 5 years.
I was looking more into getting prepared. We seem to be unprepared to tackle major road projects. Union restrictions. I was told that by John Carrington that we cannot subcontract. Is that correct, John?
What I said is the drainage work is union work, and the contract does not allow for subcontracting if you're trying to avoid paying them overtime. So, we could work them overtime, but we do subcontract out all the paving and the reclamation milling process.
Okay. All right. Thanks for clarifying that.
But there are, and we'll talk at budget, that I am asking for an extra $500,000 to do chip seal and a cape seal in neighborhood roads, that don't get that much traffic, and it'll last for 10 years. So that's better than waiting to get paved, which will last 30 years. So it's another technique that we'd like to try and see how it works. But it wouldn't work on our well-traveled roads, or the ones that are, beyond repair.
Okay, thank you. I'll end that there.
Okay, Mr. Shakin.
Thanks. So I don't have a question so much as just some thoughts. I know Ryan is looking for some feedback from us tonight about things that we think are good ideas in general. Not that we're authorizing expenditures this evening, but that there's lots of details about aspects of the plan that Ryan wanted some guidance from us about. Yeah, we thought this was a good direction to go, or no, we didn't. Before he's sort of embarked with staff on the significant amount of work that's going to be required to sort of put a program together, a recommendation for us, together in detail. So my thoughts, I'm looking at the ARPA project summary sheet that Ryan emailed us earlier today. Which, by the way, just Ryan, I know this is a special meeting, so as we're posting materials for this meeting for the public, I think it would be helpful if we just included all of the documentation, including the presentation, because our packet really doesn't have any information in it. Anyway, we spent a lot of time talking about what I would sort of term as infrastructure related needs. I'm trying to see where that is on this document, but so my feedback from that, listening to the conversation tonight, is that's maybe a thing that we want more information about before we make a decision, and maybe not to come forward with an implementation plan, but instead to get some more data down on paper from the school system, for example, about the need for the water. I know this is something that has come from them, and I hear everything that Alan has said tonight, but I've been on the council for 6 years. This is the first time I'm hearing of this need at the middle school, and so I'd like to sort of learn a lot more and get a lot more down on paper before I'm ready to say, yeah, let's spend $1.3 million bringing public water all the way there. and I think as far as sort of road improvement goes, I would agree with what the mayor said, that we've got a lot of sources of revenue, including that aren't one-time funding, that we can use to potentially sort of bolster our road improvement budget pretty significantly to get more roads done faster, including substantial new pilot funds in federal and other federal sources. So from, one counselor's opinion, when I'm looking at this list and saying, what are some things that I would say, like, yeah, get us implementation details on. First, this pocket for facilities, all of the different, COVID direct response to COVID facility improvements. Yeah, let's go. Let's get some detail about these. I think these are things we should be doing as soon as possible. And I would just sort of add, to the extent that there's other sort of non-HVAC related air quality improvement things that we can do, especially in facilities without full HVAC systems like town hall, that we should think about them. Just literally something as simple as purchasing air cleaners, portable air cleaners. It's something I've been frustrated that the school district hasn't done in the elementary schools, even though I understand that they're decommissioning those schools at the end of the year. There was federal money for it, and it's frustrating that we've gone a year of COVID without 2 years of COVID with students in the schools without simple, few $100 air cleaning machines in the classrooms. And then I would like sort of implementation details on the human services piece, especially how these sort of funding support thing is going to work, and what are the details for how you would envision those funding going out. And then similarly for business relief funding, I think that's something that, businesses have taken the hits, and we need to figure out how to get dollars into their hands now. And then it's a new item, and I see that it's sort of TBD, so maybe we should put off talking about it, but I'm encouraged to see the investment in open space and Parks and Rec. But it's TBD from the master plan. We talked last night, we don't have a master plan yet. So maybe we put a pin in that until we handle the first sort of tranche. But if I were to prioritize, maybe adding the planning and development projects to that list, sort of where should you put staff time into coming up with, something that's ready for us to take a vote on, that's where I would start. And I recognize that I just identified like half of the plan, but maybe ranked in that order for me, that's my order of priority.
Thank you.
Mr. Coleman?
If you're not tired of hearing from me tonight.
Only slightly.
This question is for Alan. I want to clarify something that you said earlier this evening about lead and lead solder in the middle school. I'm assuming, and I want to clarify that, this probably doesn't have anything to do with the water source. It has everything to do with the existing plumbing in the school, and it doesn't have anything to do with whether the water comes from Connecticut water or whether it comes from wells. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Basically, no. You're correct. It wouldn't be so much from the source. The source affects it depending on when you talk about the level of alkalinity level, the corrosive level, pH level, that's what I'm looking for. The pH of our water mostly is around 7, which is what they consider pH neutral. So the source is actually pretty good. So that, in that sense, it could have effect on it. If our pH levels were off, that could do it. But without that being off, it's not so much that it's in the source of the water there.
Thank you for clarifying that. I found that to be important. Personally, I'd like to do a site visit up there if that could be arranged.
Sure, we could make arrangements for that.
Ryan, when we signed the agreement originally with Connecticut Water, their commitment to us is that they would provide as much water as necessary and deliver it. I'm wondering, do we really, if we decide to do this, do we have to pay the full freight of installing the pipes?
We did, there was some staff-to-staff communication with Connecticut Water. I believe maybe Linda and Derek could speak to that. There's certainly a question that I had earlier on, hoping that there might be some, receptivity on their part to approach this from a cost share standpoint. And I don't know, I don't have the document in front of me, or documents in front of me that speak to what their obligations are, but I think at the end of the day, basically, they didn't view an extension in this part of town in terms of the number of customers, because it's not particularly high density development along the way. Didn't necessarily see it as economically compelling for them to extend the system. But I don't know, Linda, Derek, anybody who's familiar with some of the foundational agreements with Connecticut Water, maybe you could speak to what if any leverage we would have in terms of compelling them to support this.
I think that my understanding of the agreements that we have has to do with the quantity of water they supply, not providing the infrastructure, the other than that main pipeline from Tallinn down to Four Corners. So that was the large project that they funded. We did ask the question as to whether or not there could be cost sharing, and essentially they looked at this as a single end user, so that while people may, that we are the single end user if we're building a pipeline to go to the middle school. So I think if there were anything, it might be, it was maybe $10,000, if that. It was not a lot. It was not a lot of money from a cost sharing standpoint.
One of the things I want to point out about the transportation bills, it's not necessarily so true of this pot of money, but one of the goals of the transportation bills is to allow communities to undertake large projects which they couldn't undertake on their own, as for example rebuilding bridges. So and clearly water for the schools is a significant project, but it does make sense in this context.
I'd also just mention this project. So right now it's programmed as sort of a 50-50 cost share between rescue plan and another funding source, to be determined later. And we've talked about how that could be, some of this new federal infrastructure funding. I just want to, say something I don't think I've said yet, which is, when it comes to applying for that competitive funding, I believe we would absolutely, even if the council supported the project, supported up to $1.25 million to fund that project from rescue plan funds, I think we would still pursue well in excess of half the project cost from these federal pots of money. And if we were successful at getting, 80+% supported through another competitive grant, obviously that would be additional ARPA money we could reprogram for other things. So, I'm kind of saying that I think worst case scenario, we could feel pretty good given the nature of this project that the other half of the project funds would come from someplace else, but we could actually do far better than that, in which case we could require far less of rescue plan funding for it.
Okay, are there any further questions about the details of the plan? Mr. Osberger.
Yeah, I just have the two last follow-up questions. They're not necessarily questions, they're more statements. The arts relief thing, I think it's great that we're going to run around and put bushes up and everything, but I think for the most part, I think people looking at bushes when they're riding through a pothole kind of would maybe upset them. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't recall, is Eagleville Green going to be deed restricted as far as affordable housing?
Yes.
Thank you.
Percentage. Yeah. Go for it, Linda.
So presently, as I mentioned earlier, in response to Councilor Bruder's question, the applicant is pursuing funds from both the Department of Housing and the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. So there will be restrictions through that as well. So they are required by their site plan approval to restrict at least 30% of the units. The last proposal that I saw from them based on their negotiations for funding with the state it looked like I think 2/3 of the units would actually be income restricted. So a lot of that will be driven by the funding source if they get funding through DOH and CHAPA.
Thank you, Linda.
All right, my next question is, where do we go from here? Ryan?
Next steps on your screen. Hopefully you can see that. So this is the roadmap basically that I am proposing. I am hopeful that basically in a month's time, so by the middle of next March, the council would be in a position to, basically, I guess, lend its seal of approval to what I'm calling a preliminary or a tentative funding plan. Unless the council has a different feeling on this than previously, I was of the understanding and expectation that there would be some effort made for, public involvement, stakeholder engagement, some public response to, this plan before final decisions were made. And so if that's the case, I was thinking that basically during the month of March, or the latter portion of March, we might seek that stakeholder input so the council could move towards finalizing its funding plan in the month of April. And that's somewhat born by necessity. And if Charmaine's here, she could probably speak to this in more detail. But as I understand it, April 30th, so basically 2.5 months from now, looms as something of a deadline for municipalities to submit what's called the project and expenditure report. It's required of all state and local fiscal relief fund recipients. And so I believe I don't know the exact level of detail or, again, how granular or specific it needs to be, but there is an expectation that a funding plan of sorts, as I understand it, be provided to the Treasury at the end of April. So I don't know, Charmaine, not to put you on the spot if you're there.
No, I am.
Okay.
And that's an accurate account of what the requirements are. The portal has been open for the past few weeks for small communities or any use such as the town of Mansfield to do its reporting. And although he indicated April 30th, there's a great deal of data that needs to be uploaded. So in an effort to make sure that our submission is accurate and we have sufficient time to review before the final deadline, which is what Ryan referred to, it would be a great help for the finance department to be able to take a couple of at least 2 weeks to do the submission, which would afford us the opportunity to go back and forth with the respective subject matter experts for clarification on any questions that come up during the process.
So is the expectation that the council will conclude its deliberations on this before the beginning of our regular budget season?
Or basically during the budget season, I guess I would say.
Could we have as a goal to get it done before budget season?
That would be super helpful for finance.
We can move as fast as the council wants to move. I just didn't want to rush you, Mayor.
I'm not hearing any serious objection, and I think that a great many of these proposals are right on target. I think we could probably make some initial decisions on things that we all agree on. For example, I doubt that anybody's going to disagree with improving the HVAC at the library. So I think we could begin to clear the decks and move a little bit more promptly through this. I think it would be really confusing to start to do budget deliberations at the same time that we're doing this. So if we could aim for completing it in that period of time, I think it would be much better for the council in any case. Does anybody disagree with me?
I would just say that So part of the timeline, or a driver of, I guess, this proposed timeline taking as much time as laid out here, is sort of centered around, I guess, holding some time there for public engagement. So things obviously, could be streamlined a bit in terms of the council's decision making if that was not hard baked in there. So I guess that would, that's a decision of the council, though.
What are you contemplating for public involvement?
Right now, basically a late March, public hearing. There may be an instrument or could be paired with an instrument, whether it be an online survey or something else. So kind of multimodal, if you will, way of seeking public input around the preliminary funding plan. But probably a combination of, questionnaire based and a public hearing or public meeting input session of some sort.
Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, now you're on the subject of public input. I believe Ryan allocated $375,000 for business relief. Is that correct, Ryan?
I believe it's $370,000, but you're pretty close to that number.
Okay. Do we know the actual harm that was caused to our business financially? Is there some public input we could do on that to actually try to pin down the damage that was truly caused by COVID-19 to our businesses?
In terms of any existing data that may exist, since I see Cynthia's there, I don't know if there are any metrics or any data sets that we could draw from to establish a baseline. Or if there's anything you want to add to that.
I would just like to, make sure that we're covering the actual damages. I'm not sure how you would determine metrics on gathering that data. I'm open to ideas, because I would certainly like to make sure that we don't shortchange the businesses here in town if they were harmed for more than $370,000.
I would assume that the business losses far exceeded $370,000. The question is, how do we, what kind of mechanisms do we put into place to assist those businesses recover? And some of it may be unrecoverable. Mr. Shuren?
I'm just going to point out that the businesses that are gone are gone. There may be no way to bring them back.
Yeah. Ms. Briffalat?
Thanks, Mayor. So I really wanted public input. I really pushed for that early. I envisioned it very differently, though, that it would have been at a much earlier. I know you did the survey and you got some, but I'm thinking by March, we're so close to the deadline that the likelihood that it be meaningful has come, and that we can change course at that point is so slim that I'm wondering if it's futile to try to do it, that it will just be an exercise, but not really meaningful. And I'm could easily be convinced I'm on the wrong track here. It's just a gut feeling that we're past when we could have had a meaningful conversation. And I don't blame anybody for this. I don't mean to. It's just a complicated year, and I know everybody's had an awful lot on their plate, and you've all been scrambling like crazy to figure out what any of this means and how to use the money. So, but I just wonder if just a public hearing about something that's really already set in stone is really a helpful exercise.
Would you be happier if we did a public hearing in the next couple of weeks?
I don't know. Is there a sense that things could really be changed at this point, and that new ideas would actually have but could be wrapped up? I mean, this is a question really for Ryan. I mean, it might be that March is not too late. It just seems like, given how hard this has been to get done so far, that between March and April seems like it's too tight.
I mean, I think I could, in all honesty, I mean, I could see it several different outcomes. I could see, a lot of public support. Let's say support for all the general objectives that have been laid out, and it could be relatively minor. In terms of shifting allocation of funds, a little bit here, a little bit there, but big picture, there's support for all the big ticket items, the conceptual sort of stuff across the board. And that wouldn't necessarily be an overwhelming task to try to change. But obviously, if there's major, if it's sort of like hitting the reset button and doing a structural overhaul of all this, that would definitely be challenging, because obviously staff would have to take a crack at stitching all that back together. Then we'd have to go back before the council to see what you all, thought about it. So I guess it would depend on how dramatic or extensive, I guess, the public feedback was. So that is logistically, I don't disagree with your concern. I don't think it's unfounded that it may be difficult to reconcile, but by the same token, if there's general support, then I guess, everybody feels that much better about moving forward with a plan if there seems to be public support for it. So.
Mr. Bruder, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I was just gonna point out to my colleague, I think that there was a survey in which I don't think that it was as widespread in terms of the feedback on it, but I think I'm remembering that correctly for the ARPA funds.
I think it was like 400, responses, which, there are a lot of surveys that garner fewer responses, but certainly in terms of our overall population, that's a small percentage.
But I would. Mayor, if I could just finish by saying I'm in favor of having a public hearing sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I actually, to Terry's comment, I think there's enough still in this plan that is in the, sort of formative stage that my thinking for moving forward is that we, rather than allocate $7 million in the next month, that we allocate however much we are sort of comfortable and confident can move forward quickly, and that whatever and that invites us to have some public input, so that if we do hear from a number of people in the public about a particular area that might not be addressed in the plan or whatever, that we can look at what is sort of not, what is still in the formative stage and think about whether there are other ways to fund those important priorities or what. So I know it will invite interest groups. I think that's okay. We want to hear from people who care about different things in town. I know that was an issue in the survey, and again, that's fine. It's not the problem to me at all. And so I think we should have a public hearing sort of on these proposals, get that input, and then my thinking on next step is that we make decisions on what we're ready to make decisions on, and we leave undecided what we need more time or work from town staff on before we're ready to make decisions. We have until the end of next year. No, I'm sorry, 2 years from now, the end of 2024, to allocate these funds to decide how to spend the money. So while we should get to doing the things that are ready to go because there's a rush, there's a need, we are under no regulatory pressure to allocate and then expend every last penny of this next month.
All right, if we're going to discuss this in our next council meeting, what I'm going to suggest is that every council member pick out of these projects the ones they think are most easily implemented and on which there is the most agreement, and send that list to Ryan so we get a sense of what we can begin to talk about to get things off the table as soon as possible. I also think that we ought to look for an early date to have a public hearing on at least those items which are remaining after we take these first things off the top. Mr. Shuren.
In terms of a public, what would be useful, it would be not just what's on the list, but to hear from the public about what is not on the list. Right?
Right. I mean, but I think what we do is we say we've got $4 million left that we have not determined we're going to spend. Here are the things that the town has proposed. Do you agree with these things? Do you have additional suggestions? Where should we go from here?
Yeah.
And I think that has to be done earlier rather than later. So my sense is the first things we do is we decide what we all know we want to have done. You know, and my example of that is HVAC in the library. And then we figure that out as soon as possible, have a public hearing on the remaining money, and then continue to do the work and as quickly as possible so we can get as much done before the budget season begins. I really think that discussing this on top of departmental requests for money is going to be very confusing. Mr. Coleman.
I don't want to confuse quickly with thoroughly. We most certainly have a lot of work to do here, and it has to be done very carefully. Maybe we're going to need more special meetings. I think we're going to have to make a commitment to do more work so we get this done thoroughly and quickly, if that's the way you want to do it.
Well, let's start with everybody picking the projects they think are most essential and most easily implemented. See if we can get those projects off the table so that when we can look at the remaining money and the remaining projects at greater leisure. And I think that, we have staff who's done a great deal of work on this, and they've been talking about this for months now. So I think that to some extent, we have to trust some of the judgments of the professionals who are doing the work. But obviously there are fuzzy areas in this proposal, and those are the areas where we can exercise greater judgment and ask for public input. Does that make sense to people? I'm not seeing yays or nays.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. So we'll get our list to Ryan, and we'll see where we go. And this will be a continuing item on the council agenda, Ryan?
Sounds like it will be.
Okay. And let's think about the earliest possible time for a public hearing. And probably it has to be separate from a council meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of, given that this is not, your more typical public hearing where there's very little public to hear, it probably would dominate a regularly scheduled business meeting. So I suspect it probably would need to be a standalone of some sort.
Mr. Osberger.
Yeah, and can we find some sort of a vehicle to make sure that the word gets out, so that it's, not at like 3:00 in the afternoon, but we have it so that when people can actually attend, and somehow get the marketing out there to let people know that there's in fact a meeting for this and its importance.
Well, I've got to say one of the most significant ways to get the word out is for everybody on the council to notify all of the people who are on their own mailing lists. What I have learned over the decades of organizing is that a direct invitation from somebody works far better than a mass mailing or coverage in the media or anything else. I mean, we can do all the normal things. We make sure that Connor Lewinsky has an article about it. We can make sure that everybody, it goes out through the schools. We can make sure that it goes out through all the normal places. There's no guarantee that will get people's attention. The personal approach is what gets people's attention.
Oh, but all those things, Mayor, that you just spoke of, that's kind of the direction I was considering.
Yes, yes, we'll do that. All right, is there anything else to do for this evening?
I very much appreciate all the feedback and the questions.
We very much appreciate all the work that you and your staff have done. I mean, this has really been extraordinarily useful and helpful. And it's one of those times when you really get proud of the staff you're working for. So with that, I think it's time for a motion to adjourn. Is there such a motion? Mr. Shuren moves, Mr. Osberger seconds. If you object to leaving, you can stay.
Have a good night.
And thank you to all the staff and everybody else who's been here sitting through tonight too.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Recording stopped.